Welcome back, and we have our shapes and our drawing set up. I'm going to delete the layer shapes by clicking on the garbage can. That gets rid of it. You'll see that drawing, because we brought it in after creating the layer shapes, starts off with as many keyframes as shapes had. So that's kind of a useful thing. We start off with over about 20 seconds worth of animation built into Flash. Just to talk about some of the advantages of Flash over Photoshop, you can have many seconds or even minutes worth of animation exported from Flash without running into the problems of memory overload that are going to quickly happen in a bitmap based program like Photoshop, where you have only so much memory that you can dedicate to any short project. Also, Photoshop doesn't have scenes and other things in it like Flash does. Here under Window, I can go to where we have workplaces and other things that are useful. But let me find Scene, which is Shift plus F2. And the scene window, like any window in Flash, can be grabbed and dragged and placed into a new location. So scene 1 is over there. If you want to make an additional scene, you can click on here and create a new scene. If you want to rename a scene, you just double click on it and call it something like drawing, if you'd like. And this is just like scenes inside of a movie or scenes inside of the script that you've just written for me. You can keep things straightened out in there. You can grab them and flop them around in order. So this is pretty useful. Even though if I were making a Flash movie, I would probably make a series of different files just to protect the items in there. There's a real value in your earlier processes where you know you're going to reuse a lot of symbols in creating one big universal file. Now, symbols are going to appear here in your library. You remember from class where they appear in here and you can grab them and move them back onto the screen. Here's our properties, and that's going to tell us about the specific thing that we have selected right now. This is document 1. It's unsaved, and you can see it says what size it is. All of this stuff can be changed very easily within here. I'll just change the stage color to something of a more like a creamish yellow briefly. A lot of times people like to work with kind of an off-white color rather than staring into the brightness of a purely white screen. You could also place down a layer that has a gradient on it, but this is maybe a little less jarring on the eye. In Flash, there's a lot of defaults that come in that we may not want to use. So if we go up to where it says View, click on View and you go to Snapping. Now, none of these are turned on, but quite often things like Snap to Grid or things like Snap to Objects will be on. Just make sure you turn all of those off, because those will cause things to snap, and we don't want that right now. Now, another thing I talked to you about in class when using drawing is you want to go to Flash's Properties. Now, I am having trouble getting into my Flash properties. I'm not quite sure why. That's just telling me how to do that one bit. This is probably a Mac thing versus a PC thing. But right now, I am not finding the properties. I'll have to find those elsewhere and bring them up later. In the meantime, let's change our brush settings. Let's see that our brush is set quite miserably to not having touch sensitivity and not having tilt available. Really ridiculous. Things that are absolutely essential, but the program doesn't do that. Also with the brush size, you'll notice that the brushes, the smaller ones, are pixel shaped. They're little tiny squares. You want to go to where at least it's kind of circular shaped, so you have that option. You should have this tool that shows you this good shape. Looking in here, I've lost my additional frames as well, so I'm going to go ahead and throw them in. Select this, right click on this, insert a frame. And with animation, usually you're going to want to create a frame every couple of frames over, either on 2s or on 3s. But if you work with keyframe animation, you're actually going to want to create larger skips in time, like let's say almost a second apart. Insert a keyframe. You could have also inserted a blank keyframe, and like I said, this just is horribly not visible, but I don't control how this is set up. And this is set to normal, small actually. Let me set this to medium so I can at least see where these are. If I set this to preview and context, it wouldn't work initially, but with preview and context, we can drag this left and right, which will give us some idea of what we have, but at a certain point it squashes so much you can't see it. Maybe better to switch this to preview so you can just see what your drawing is. And that way when it's squashed, it's not going to bother us quite as much. Right now I have a reddish color selected, which will give a neat effect. I'm probably going to go with more of a classic blue. And I'm just going to draw like a person sitting down. Really doesn't matter the lines you use when you're doing your drawings in Flash, or drawings for animation in general. You're just kind of drawing a series of shapes that start giving you an idea of what it is you're after. So this is kind of like a sitar shaped object, but he's holding it more like a base. Get some fairly nice shapes in here. If you don't like something, Command Z allows you to undo it a few times. Okay, so I've got this one pose. You can see down here there's a little bit of preview and context. I'll go to this next pose, and I can't see what I'm doing. Now, traditionally in drawn animation, you had sheets of vellum-like paper that were backlit on what was called a light table. These days, it's much easier to just use things like onion skinning, which refers to kind of the notion of how that vellum worked once upon a time. So if we click on this button here, you'll see that there's this very slight image of our previous frame. It reaches back to here. This, if we turn it off, the onion skin, and go back, you can see this is that actual image. So when I go to here and turn on onion skinning, I'm getting to see just a little bit of that, and this determines how far that goes in either direction. Nice thing about this onion skinning is we can extend it out extremely far into the past. If that's not bright enough, you can turn on something like this, which will show you the clear version of the drawing. It'll give you a nice hard outline that allows you to see that bit of onion skinning. I prefer this to the outline just because it's a little more classic, and I guess I'm more of a classic kind of guy. So the next thing I might want to do is to just position this into more of kind of like a turning position, as though he's making an extreme note as he goes over it. And you probably want to start breaking down your animation at this point into separate layers. Now, in classic drawn animation, you would have to do this, which is to do a bit of a trace back. Really wouldn't bother drawing him in entirely. Might position where his feet are, where his back is, and create a bit of a trace back as accurately as possible. Most of you are probably thinking, well, why don't you just copy and paste that? Well, yeah, that's another way to do it, but the trace back is one that has you go over your shapes again and maybe reconsider them. Allows you to prepare to start designing it a little bit better. And when it comes down to the actual animation that's happening, it's not all that problematic. You know, it's not like it's so jarring. You can clearly see that the arm has moved into a new position. And you would start creating your in-betweens in a couple of ways. One is you may set up your arcs, or you may try to eyeball it. I'm going to show you how to set up the arcs in the next video. So we've covered some of the basic drawings and how to set up, say, two key poses that we're going to go between.